Hello and welcome to the 4th International Conference on Computing Innovation and Applied Physics. I am Ella Haig, an Associate Professor in Artificial Intelligence at the University of Portsmouth in the UK. Today I will talk about modelling human characteristics and behaviours with artificial intelligence. I will start with a very brief history of AI, talk about data-driven and theory-driven approaches, delve into why we want to model subjective phenomena, and present some case studies from my own research. I will then focus on 3 of the main limitations and challenges of modeling subjective phenomena with AI. AI as a discipline started in the 1950s with the goal of emulating human intelligence. The focus was on reasoning and the use of curated data, so typically small and high-quality data. The early ambitions have not been delivered, and in the 1980s, we see a split between AI and machine learning, with machine learning focusing on solving more narrow, defined problems. In addition, technological advances such as the arrival of the personal computer in the 1980s, the development of the web in the 1990s, and the increase in processing power and memory on smaller and smaller hardware has led to an abundance of data. So how and why did we get interested in data about human behaviors and characteristics? I believe the initial motivation was economic gain. In the US, in the early 2000s, the supermarket Target hired someone to uncover patterns in their customer data and offer personalized coupons in the hope that this will increase their profits. And indeed, they had an over 50% increase due to this approach. Nowadays, when we think of personalized recommendations, companies like Amazon and Netflix spring to mind. So it pays to monitor people's behavior, such as their purchase history, and to make assumptions about their characteristics in order to offer them personalized products. So we moved the focus from reasoning capacity of humans with AI to modeling humans and their subjective choices. We can talk about 2 broad approaches in the modeling of human characteristics and behaviors: data-driven and theory-driven. Data-driven approaches use just the history of your interactions. For example, a supermarket would have your purchase history and give you offers on products you regularly buy. Theory-driven approaches are based on our understanding of individuals, based on disciplines such as psychology, sociology, and economics. For example, in sociology, the theory of informational social influence states that in situations where people do not know what to do, they look to other people to see what they are doing. This is why ratings and reviews have such a big influence on sales. In reality, most recommender systems use a combination of data-driven and theory-driven approaches. For example, both Amazon and Netflix use not only your purchase history, but your similarity to other people, the assumption being that if people like you liked something, you will also most probably like it. So why model subjective phenomena, apart from economic gain, which we have already discussed? We humans have always looked to understand ourselves and the world we find ourselves in. We know that despite our high capacity for reasoning, we make choices that seem irrational. Due to advances in psychology, sociology, and economics, we know that our decisions are biased, both in individual and collective contexts. So we want to better understand this to support better decision-making individually and collectively. In some contexts, currently it seems that our understanding of ourselves, and in particular our biases, is used against us, as in political campaigning and in advertising. But it is also being used to create better regulation and laws, and to develop better social environments and support systems, and prevent negative outcomes, both individually and socially. I will now focus on one particular social environment that has been playing an increasing role in our lives, and even more so in the lives of the younger generations: social media. I will present several case studies of modeling subjective phenomena on social media from my own research. So the first case study is about microaggressions. Microaggressions are minor forms of interpersonal discrimination in everyday interactions. Just like racial discrimination in the job market and the justice system, they are highly consequential for the people exposed to them. So the idea with this research that we did was to see if we can develop a tool similar to Grammarly or Killbot, with the idea of identifying when people express these microaggressions and being able to edit them out. So in our research, we started with self-reported examples of microaggressions and divided them into racial and non-racial. We applied machine learning algorithms, and the best performance was an F-score of 0.74. An F-score, and other machine learning metrics, are typically between 0 and 1. 1 is the perfect performance, and 0 indicates that nothing is correctly identified. So a score of 0.74, it's a relatively good performance, but obviously it could be better. The closer to 1, the better. We also wanted to see if our approach would work on other types of data, such as news articles, and we found that it did not work well, very likely due to the different types of text and the labeling process. However, our study did show that we can, to some degree, detect these microaggressions, so there is room for developing a tool such as Grammarly or Killbot for this particular purpose. The next study I will focus on is about suicide detection on social media. Unfortunately, there are some shocking statistics about suicide in young people, with suicide being the second leading cause of death in youth globally. In the UK and the US, we also have many examples of inquests concluding that social media contributed to some of these deaths due to the exposure to posts related to suicide, self-harm, and depression on these social media platforms. There is now an ongoing debate about regulation of social media, especially for children and young people. Like in the previous case study, the idea was to build an automatic tool that would detect people at risk of suicide with a view to provide immediate support. The data we worked with was relatively small, but of very high quality. It contained 7 categories of posts, which you can see in the table on the slide. And the aim was to identify the first one, which is that one was possible suicide intent. The other posts were about suicide as well, but it was about different topics that people were discussing on social media. It wasn't to express intent of suicide. So we focused on that category that was of interest, and we obtained an F-score of 0.8, which was an improvement on previous results, and gives us hope that we can build automatic tools to detect at least some of the people at risk. The next study is about cyber hate, and in particular misogyny, which is hate against women. Sadly, in this area, we also have some shocking statistics, with 2/3 of teenagers being exposed to hate material online, and 1/5 of them having such hate directed at them. We look to distinguish 3 aspects. The first one was to identify misogyny, so whether it's present or absent. The second one was to distinguish different 6 categories of misogyny. And the third one was to distinguish between active or passive misogyny. And you can have this, you can see the stats in the table on the slides. As you can see, also the results were disappointing, but in line with the state of the art at the time. So with this particular problem, what we learned is that the language that is being used is actually much harder to detect. So there are some things that do not work particularly well for automatic approaches, and this is one of them. The next case study I'm going to talk about is about sarcasm, which is a linguistic phenomenon, which is a very interesting one. Sarcasm is when one says or writes the opposite of what they mean. It is a form of irony that conveys criticism in an indirect way. So why do we want to detect sarcasm? So because the meaning is the opposite of what the words actually say, if we do not detect sarcasm and we process text with the face value meaning, it means we've actually lost that underlying intent. So it means that we're actually not getting to what was the intention to convey. So in our current tools, as we are unable to detect sarcasm to a good level, it means that we are inferring the wrong things, at least in some of these situations when sarcasm is expressed. As you can see on the slides, again, we had disappointing results, but these were in line with the state of the art at the time when we were doing this research. This is still a very hard problem, even now. The last case study is about state-backed propaganda, and in this research, we focused on polarity and objectivity in the language used in the propaganda context. The context of this research is that many people are obtaining their news from social media rather than official channels, and this is even more so for younger people. We know from research that there are actors who coordinate such propaganda campaigns on social media, and perhaps the best known example, certainly in the West, is Russia's interference in the 2016 US presidential election. For the research we did, we used data that was released by Twitter, now known as X, and the data was released after accounts were identified as state-backed. They released this data for several countries. We focused on Iran and on a particular political event, which was the Iranian nuclear deal. We found that there was an almost equal distribution of positive and negative tweets, which was unusual, as previous research shows a dominance of negative posts. So this indicated a change in strategy in how propaganda was being conducted. We also looked at the objectivity of the language used in these tweets, and we found something very interesting, as shown on the violin plot on the slide. What we can see in this plot is that although the neutral tweets have the highest objectivity, many of the positive and the negative tweets have a high level of objectivity. This shows that objective language is used as a persuasive tool. As you've seen in these case studies, with some phenomena, we can obtain reasonably good results, while with others, the algorithm's performance are really too low to be used in practice. A big reason for this is the labeling process. To be able to train algorithms to detect certain things, we need examples of those things. So if I want to detect microaggressions, I need examples of both microaggressions and examples of no microaggressions. In other words, we need what we call the ground truth. In subjective phenomena, however, it is very difficult to establish the ground truth with 100% certainty. It is not something that can be objectively measured. So what do? We have two approaches for obtaining these labels that represent the ground truth. We ask people to provide them, or we use automatic or semi-automatic tools. And now I will discuss two case studies with these two different approaches. In the suicide detection case study, the data was labeled by humans. The process started with identifying keywords and terms related to suicide. Then 4 people labeled the data by choosing one of 7 categories. These categories were identified by experts in the area of suicide to capture communication related to suicide. And finally, the posts with less than 75% agreement between the labelers were discarded. Human annotator agreement seems to vary between 70 and 80%, and 75% is often used as a benchmark. And this happens for 2 to 3 categories. But the more categories there are, the harder it becomes for annotators to agree, because of this subjective nature of the data. Now let's look at the other case study. For the case study on state-backed propaganda, we used a semi-automatic approach for labeling by employing the CentiWordNet lexicon. This lexicon is like a dictionary that has weights or numerical values for positivity, negativity, and objectivity for each word or term in that dictionary. So we identified how objective a post is by averaging the values for all the words in that post. So this approach is giving us a way to do things automatically, but it also has an interesting problem. So we can have problems such as the fact that words from our text are not present in that lexicon. So we can't find the values for those, so that's just left out. We also have the problem of pre-processing of text and removal of words. When we typically prepare the text for automatic analysis, we remove some of those words. And by removing those words, we might skew a little bit the meaning of what we end up with. And finally, one specific problem, which is about trying to capture if something is positive or negative, is the fact that we use what's called a neutral category. Well, we're trying to see where people are not having a tendency towards either positive or negative, and we call this category neutral. However, when we create this label, we very often do this by identifying values that are exactly the same. So we have some positive content, we have some negative content, and the values for these are equal, so we label that post as negative. But that is not the same as saying that there's nothing positive or nothing negative expressed in that tweet. This is a known limitation of this area, but it's one that is good to have in mind when we're doing these automatic analyses, to be aware that this limitation does exist. While technology seems to advance at a fast pace, the underlying data and the theory may not reflect our current knowledge. So we are aware of biases and stereotypes, but these are actually very much largely ignored in the development of technology. For example, language evolves, but our tools, such as lexicons, are not updated at the same pace. Theory in other disciplines also evolves, but we still use old theories. For example, most research modeling emotions, including my research, uses theories from the 80s and 90s. And these theories were about universal emotions, the fact that there are a number of emotions, 5, 7, they're different theories, which are present across all cultures. However, this theory has largely been disproven, but we have nothing else that we can work with that is structured in such a way that AI tools could make use of that. Finally, we are aware of biases and stereotypes, but we still ignore this when we build new technology. For example, we know that the technology behind ChatGPT and similar tools have been trained on data that is mainly in English and that reflects an American culture. So this is more than just Western culture. It has been shown before that Western culture is present in a lot of technology that we develop, but this actually is specifically American, so it's even more narrow than that. Finally, one of the most difficult challenges we now have is related to manipulation and impersonation. Fake news have been around for a while, but impersonation has brought fake news to another level, with fake images and videos of known people such as politicians and news presenters. So in this case, the modeling is done with the aim to create a digital copy of a real person without the permission of that person, and to use that digital copy for purposes that are not entirely legitimate. Unfortunately, this is also happening to ordinary people, and it's done by ordinary people because we have access to these tools. They are widely available. And you might wonder what ordinary people why want to do that. And we've seen a rise in the use of such tools by ordinary people for the purpose of amusement or revenge. Finally, there is another trend where impersonation is being used, where there is an increase in scams and in fraud that has resulted from this impersonation of people in general, and lately the impersonation of voice, which was thought to be a good security feature. Now we know that this is not reliable anymore because we can create a fake recording with somebody else's voice. In this presentation, I focused on case studies about modeling of human behaviors and characteristics on social media. as a social environment that is playing an increasing role in people's lives, especially for the younger generations. Research evidence about the negative effect of social media has been mounting, and there is now a momentum in the EU, the UK, and the US, and other parts of the world to bring in laws and regulations to address some of these harmful effects of social media. There are other areas, however, such as health and education, in which the modeling of human behaviors and characteristics has had an overwhelmingly positive effect. Thank you for your attention.